Hello and welcome to Fresh Take from What Fresh Hell Laughing in the Face of Motherhood. This is Margaret.
And this is Amy, and today we are talking to Amanda Montell. Amanda is a writer and linguist from Baltimore. She is the author of the acclaimed bestseller, Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism, which our listeners will recognize as a book that Margaret and I quote very often, particularly Amanda's discussion of thought-terminating cliches and everything about being in cults. Amanda is also the creator and host of the hit podcast, Sounds Like a Cult. Today, we're going to talk about Amanda's new book, The Age of Magical Overthinking, Notes on Modern Irrationality, and her new podcast called Magical Overthinkers. Amanda lives in Los Angeles with her partner, plants, and pets. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you so much for having me. What a warm room.
Oh yeah, we're
Warm
excited.
welcome for our. We've been we've been awaiting you as a guest. We've just been sitting here for all this time awaiting you.
Manifesting.
That's right. We were
manifested
manifesting.
you.
That's
We
right.
manifested you.
I feel it.
Amanda,
I feel manifested.
Love it.
Start by telling us, Amanda, what magical thinking is and how that's sort of
Yeah.
broadly defined, and then how you define magical overthinking.
Sure. Okay. So magical thinking all on its own is an age-old human quirk. It's something we've always done. It's our penchant to believe that our internal thoughts and feelings can affect external events. So I actually tell a tiny anecdote in the book where I got a free eclair from my local coffee shop. And my initial reaction to that was like, oh my God, it must have been because I let someone merge on the drive over here. Like we make these
Right.
sort of false cause and effect misattributions because it helps the world feel more manageable, more predictable, and our magical thinking increases during times of grief or misery or just general tumult. When we feel out of control, we start to magically think a little bit more. And that's always been the case. But I argue in this book that magical overthinking is a product of this specific age. It's a product of mass information overload combined with widespread loneliness, in addition to this capitalistic pressure to know everything under the sun. So I couldn't help but notice that living in the information age didn't necessarily make life make any more sense. And it certainly didn't make life feel any better. So I've been calling this clash of the information age and our innate irrationalities as human beings the age of magical overthinking.
And the idea, because we always try to start on the podcast with the question, is this a problem? And is there a spectrum of belief on this magical thinking? Like clearly there are people, including famous talk show hosts, who believe you can manifest realities to come into your life. And so, like, how do you deal with this as a spectrum of people? There are lots of people who believe that their thoughts create reality.
Yeah. So this idea of magical thinking is a tenet in so many belief systems. It's really deeply ingrained in us.
Right.
So
I guess
on its
prayer
own,
in some ways is magical thinking, right?
100%.
Right.
Yes. Or even more like secular delusions. I mean, that thing about my free eclair is not connected to any like religious ideology, but that's magical thinking, all right. And it is not necessarily bad. I mean, even engaging with ideas of manifestation can be a good and positive thing. Like, it is true that our mindset can affect outcomes in various ways. It's when you start to get dogmatic about it and absolutist about it. It's when, TikTok manifestation gurus are weaponizing people's feelings of unease because of the pandemic or something tragic that they might be going through in their personal life or the unpredictability of an election year. There is a lot of chaos in our society right now. We are exposed to more information and more human identities in a day than we were ever really meant to. And so our minds can't handle it. And as a bid to reclaim some agency, we're starting to magically think a little bit more. And there are plenty of nefarious figures who are more than willing to cash in on that. So that TikTok, Instagram manifestation guru, your platform of choice, might then, sort of lure you into signing up for their $30 a month
If you spend
bespoke.
money,
Yes,
even
if
better,
you spend
and
money,
you'll get it even faster.
Exactly. Then you will learn my sort of proprietary manifestation technique. And if it doesn't work, that's your fault because I am all knowing. And, manifestation at its most extreme really implies that like any suffering you experience is your fault and your fault alone. It is not a product of, you know, systemic issues or random bad luck. And so it can be very sort of victim blaming, and spiritual bypassing is a term that gets thrown around. So there is certainly a wide spectrum of magical thinking, magical overthinking, and I like to, delve in the nuance as much as I can because I don't want to completely ride off our innate irrationalities. They are there for a reason, and it's fun to be a little delulu here and there. But it's about, be having as much self-awareness as possible so that we can be more skeptical of our own minds and more compassionate toward other people's minds.
Mhm.
There's another way that I think this is getting like suddenly worse, right? I mean, why is it different than when I used to, watch Oprah after school and believe I could manifest the adulthood that I wanted for myself? There was a thing I just saw it over the last week. A TikTok cuckoo, whoever she was, talking about how she healed her kidney infection with her mind, but she was doing it in a rhyming rap song, and she was talking about the aliens and the pyramids.
Amy, you got lost on
And
TikTok,
well, this is the point. I'm not on TikTok. I don't even have TikTok. However, I was shared this cuckoo lady's video like 6 times over the weekend on Facebook and Twitter, the social media I do go on. And I thought to myself, this is interesting. I mean, reading this book, getting ready for this interview, that this woman, everybody was sharing her to be like, can you believe this lady? But I'm like, here, but you're also sharing her to all your followers. Like she just had a
Exactly.
huge national platform to tell people you could solve kidney infections with your mind.
Yeah, it's pretty destructive. And I'll say this, what is unique about today's approach to manifestation is not only that on social media, someone who no one knew about yesterday could be the
Mhm.
celebrity of tomorrow, and celebrity is combining with, these inherently addictive devices, like social media is objectively more addictive than any other form of media, I can venture to say. And so you have celebrity in combination with an addictive device, in combination with, some like ingrained delusions that have always been appealing to us, but are now dialed up to an 11 because of all these other conditions. And then, of course, like, I mean, we're all trying to make a buck. Like we live in capitalism. And so if you can combine celebrity, spiritual delulu, social media, and money-making endeavors, I mean, that's like the perfect storm. And it again, like it doesn't have to be life-ruining, earth-shattering. However, a lot of these manifestation gurus are operating in within the same cognitive bias as some really, really nefarious conspiracy theorists. And so I have this one chapter in the book that we're kind of discussing now called I Swear I Manifested This. And it talks about proportionality bias, which is our deep seated proclivity to think that big events or even just big feelings must have had a big cause. So it like
Mm.
Princess Diana could not have died because of some random tragedy or a sequence of
Right.
unfortunate events. She must have been killed by the royal family. That's the only way that this massive catastrophe makes proportional sense. And that can explain a lot of the conspiracy theories that were surrounding what just happened with Kate Middleton. And that proportionality bias explains so much, not only hardcore conspiracy theories like QAnon or, Holocaust denial of some of those like really bad ones, but also on a more positive note, ideas of manifestation, because it is that very same misattribution of cause and effect. It's, I used to have no job and no love life. And now I met like the paramour of my dreams and I'm making more money because I bathed my crystals and I read The Secret and I manifested it. So that mentality, while it may start out on a more positive level with ideas of manifestation, can easily be weaponized to send someone down a rabbit hole that could get much more nefarious because it cracks your sort of trust in logic and critical thinking or in institutions that you always believed in. It fractures that trust in the beginning and says either oh yeah, no, you can't trust anything because an elite cabal is controlling the sociopolitical order, or you can't trust anything, you can only trust your own mind with the help of this guru. And both of
Mm.
those mentalities are a little bit dangerous.
And you talk a little bit in the book, not a little bit, you talk in the book about the science and how our brains sort of seek this information out. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to talk about that. We are talking to Amanda Montell, the author of The Age of Magical Overthinking, Notes on Modern Irrationality, and we'll be right back. So it struck me, Amanda, in this book, I am a person who has OCD and has since I was a young child, and my brain constantly is in this mode of,
Hmm.
I didn't touch the light switch 3 times, and that is why I got an F on my paper, right? Like, since
Mhm.
I was
Right.
6 or 7 years old, I've been doing that, and I find and what's weird about it is as I've become an older person and my worldview has expanded and I have sought therapeutic care and all of this stuff, I still believe on a very fundamental level that I am controlling the outcome of the Giants game
Hmm.
by eating the cupcakes in the correct order with the numbers of the players on them. And like, I don't know. I understand rationally that my brain is only seeking evidence that reinforces that. I've read the books, I've talked to the doctors. I get it.
Hmm.
But why are our brains so hardwired to make sense of the world in a very individualistic way that that
Yeah,
somehow I skipped past the Kate Middleton story, so I didn't have any part in her being ill? I don't know what my brain is up to,
sure.
but like, why am I
Yeah.
involved in everything?
Okay, so how fascinating is it that we are the only species on this earth that narrativizes our life in order to make sense of
Right.
it? We tell fictional stories about ourselves in order to quote unquote make sense of life. It just goes to show how fundamentally confusing being a human on this earth is. And
It
I
is,
would,
it
and it's
is.
always been confusing. Like, I mean, we sometimes romanticize. I say we. Let me speak for myself. So I will sometimes fall into the trap of romanticizing the distant past because I am so frustrated with the present. And this is a habit that a lot of humans have. You know, when the present feels uncomfortable, painful, unpredictable, we sort of sink into a romanticized bath of warm fuzzies from either our own memories or kind of made up memories from a time we never knew. And so I'll think like, oh, how simple it was to live like in the hunter-gatherer period when, everybody was just like picking berries and had no iPhones. But of course, life was not better then. Like people were getting attacked by bears and dying of starvation at the age of 35. I would not rather live during that time. And yet that time was still really overwhelming. Like there were mythologies that people made up even then. There were sort of like
That's really
legends and
interesting.
and jokes and their equivalent of memes that people spread in order to understand why we're here, where we're going, what is the meaning of all this. And our life. So that is the period in which we developed our cognitive biases to make sense of the physical world enough to survive it.
Mm.
Fast forward like millennia upon millennia, our problems now are a lot more abstract. Sometimes they're totally
Mhm.
disembodied because they're arguments that are happening with people that live, say, 2,000 miles away, say that we've never even met. And so we're applying these deep rooted mental magic tricks that once proved like net positive,
Mhm.
net useful for us. We're applying them to a culture that has really outpaced our own minds. And that is like really the summation of magical overthinking. And you're
Mhm.
exactly right that like we can't fundamentally uproot these psychological shortcuts. Like they're there. They've been there for thousands of years. But I think it's really important to become aware of them because then at that point we can allow them not to control our life and we can allow them not to write off other people as like hopelessly delusional and evil. It's so easy to see someone behaving in a way that doesn't make sense to you and think like that person is defective. I'm cutting them out. I don't understand them. They are bad. But really, oftentimes, what is motivating them is a combination of these cognitive biases, which is not an excuse, but it is an explanation that has provided me with a lot of healing.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
So, this book, chapter by chapter, you go through cognitive biases, which are as you were saying, biological imperatives, another thing we love to talk about on this show. Like,
Love
why
a
is this
biological
happening?
imperative,
Why is a
people.
2-year-old a picky eater when a 1-year-old isn't a picky eater? There's a biological imperative. So the book, in such an entertaining way, goes through sort of chapter by chapter, some of the cognitive biases we've all heard of and some were new to me, at least. And so let's start with one that we definitely talk about on the podcast, the sunk cost fallacy. I'm going to
I
quote you
love a
here.
sunk cost
The
fallacy.
sunk
I
cost
say it
fallacy.
all the time.
I'm going to quote Amanda Montell. It is the conviction that spending resources that you can't get back, like money and time, or emotional resources like secrets and hope, justifies spending even more of those things. And you tell a very funny story in the book about your own sunk cost fallacy in your life. It isn't always about what's on the internet. Sometimes it's about our personal lives. And so tell us a little bit more about the sunk cost fallacy and where we have to sort of watch it tipping into excess.
Yeah. So I had heard of the sunk cost fallacy. This is one of the better known cognitive biases that gets a lot of airplay and headlines and stuff. And I started reading about it a little more when I was looking into cults for my last book, because it helped explain how you could end up 20 years in Scientology, let's say, knowing deep down that the promises that were made to you are not going to be fulfilled and that this is maybe a big mistake or at least something that you should not be involved with anymore. And yet you can't accept that loss. You are, falling victim to sunk cost fallacy because it is this, again, deep grained mental magic trick. And as I was reading about sunk cost fallacy in the context of cults, I couldn't help but notice how directly it applied to my own life in so many contexts. In the book, I write about it in the very personal and high stakes context of ending up for many, many years in a cult-like, cult of one romantic relationship that really did not serve me. And I justified it for so many years, resisting the idea that it would not go back to how things were at the beginning or to how things were promised. I was like, surely a win is just around the corner. Like, I've put this much into it. I can't give up now. And I beat myself up really badly for years after I got out of the relationship for being so irrational. I was like, of course, spending more time and resources and going on more vacations and like adding more into the relationship was not going to change it. That like doesn't make sense. But as it turns out, we make bets on ourselves and on our lives in this very specific way. And again, while it wasn't an excuse, it was an explanation. And being aware of that has really helped me make decisions moving forward, even in really small ways. So there's this one study that I quote in that chapter that talks about the related idea of additive solution bias versus subtractive solution bias.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
so
love
like
this.
this is this one study that continues to live rent free in my head in a good way. So we as human beings, naturally, but especially growing up in consumerist society, we aim to solve problems by adding variables to the equation. So when something is going wrong, whether it's a relationship or a business problem, or even just like something in your house is out of sorts, your closet is messed up, we think like, you know what I need to do? I need to buy something or hire someone or like add something to this issue in order to solve the problem. When oftentimes the much more effective but less intuitive solution is to take something away. So the study that I quoted referenced like a puzzle that was presented to different study participants involving colored blocks. And the participants were invited to solve this puzzle by either adding colored blocks or subtracting colored blocks. The vast majority of participants solved the problem by adding a whole bunch of colored blocks to the equation, when the much simpler but less intuitive solution was just taking one single block away. And I find that like I am so attracted to additive solution bias in a way that does not serve me, down to like situations as simple as I was looking at my junk drawer the other day and it's such a mess. And I was like, you know what I need? I need to go to the Container Store and I need to buy
Get
some like
more.
really
The
aesthetic
solution is
drawer
always one
organizers.
decorative basket or organizer away.
Yes,
We
this-
all believe in
Yes,
This is
it
decorative
literally
basket fallacy.
yes, the
decorative
decorative
basket
basket
fallacy.
completely.
There's your
They
next
should
book right
rename it
there,
that.
Amanda.
Fully.
Decorative basket fallacy.
I know, like, honestly, one could write a whole book just about how this applies to our homes.
Yes.
But yeah, and it did not occur to me until I was literally like on the Container Store website that I should just go through that junk drawer and throw things away. I should just throw that junk away, you know? And so that's like a really low stakes example, but it can be applied to so many other things. Like I am in this book launch process right now. Thank you so much for having me. And it's really stressful, and sometimes I'm feeling out of control of things because I worked so hard on this book and I want people to read it and I want people to love it. And it's like, that there are just some things that I have to release. Like, readers will find the book. I can't like force it into their hands. I just have to let go. But when I'm feeling stressed, I feel like, what I need to do? I need to do like one more newsletter post, or I need to do one
Mm-mm.
more like link story on my Instagram or whatever. And like none of that, all of that, it's diminishing marginal returns. Not to sound like a girl boss, but like, I'm just like, what I need to do in order to feel better? Just take something away, scale back, slow down. Like it's too much. And so, yeah, I return to that study all the time because whether you're talking about cults or your junk drawer or your career, it's so useful to be able to understand the fallacies that are informing our decisions because they're not our fault, but we
Well,
do
that
have some agency.
I want to underline that, particularly as so many moms listen to us, and that the idea that moms are constantly presented with this fallacy, which is that there is somewhere out there a mysterious box called child self esteem, and someone has a map and someone has a class that will lead you there, and you will open it, and then your children will have self esteem, and that this fallacy is constantly presented to moms, like classes and camps
Mm,
and extracurriculars. And are you making the bento box lunches that have little compartments with that are fruit is shaped like flowers? And that there is so much language in
God.
motherhood that is like, you are not doing enough. You need to keep adding things. It is your job. And,
Oh,
especially for special needs moms, I think sometimes the idea of like, you're the warrior, you're the savior, you're the Superman who can make it all turn out okay. That's not true. Your kid may have things
no.
going on that are way out of your control, and I think this is something for the moms listening to really keep picturing that puzzle, and that the world is always telling you more color blocks, supermom. You can figure it out if you just pour this giant tub of color blocks onto it. And that, like, is it maybe taking less something away, putting less pressure on yourself?
Yeah,
Because that, like, I feel those goosebumps popping up. Like, that speaks to me as a mom of like,
totally.
you don't have to always do more, but
Hmm.
there's a lot of people making a lot of money telling you that you have to do more.
Well, yeah, because they want you to do more in their direction. It will directly benefit
Right.
them. As you
Yeah.
were talking, I just wanted to mention that like I got to work through a lot of stuff regarding my relationship with my own mom in this book
Mm.
because the opening chapter is about these increasing, intensifying cycles of celebrity worship and dethronement that we see in our culture these days, where
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
a lot of
Poor
fans
Dolly
of pop
Parton.
stars, yeah, a lot of fans of pop stars, young fans, are starting to project almost like a maternal child relationship onto their favorite celebrities. And that's becoming more intense in our society these days. And so that chapter is called Are You My Mother, Taylor Swift? And it's about the cognitive bias that underlies these cycles of celebrity worship and dethronement. And what's interesting about that bias, which is called the halo effect, is that as I started reading about it, I realized that I am the unhinged Swiftie to my mom's Taylor Swift, or at least I was when I was growing up. The halo effect describes our tendency to admire one single trait in a person and jump to the conclusion that they must be perfect overall. And this stems from ways that we used to find role models in our physical communities as ancient humans for survival purposes. But we're now mapping those jumps to conclusions onto our modern parasocial relationships. And that is proving pretty destructive for both the subject of our worship and for the fans ourselves. But the original subject of the halo effect was our parental figures. And
Sure,
so
right.
when I was reading about these like fan idol dynamics, and I swear I have a point that comes back to motherhood, I was thinking like, this reminds me so much of how I treated my mom when I was an adolescent, where I built her up like this perfect godlike figure. And as soon as I realized she was fallible or, didn't live up to these expectations that like she didn't even imply, like she didn't do anything to suggest that she was perfect, right? But like I built her up in my head, and so many of us build our parents up as perfect in our heads, particularly our mothers who have like a slimmer margin of error in society in general. And that's the same thing goes for female pop stars. And so when I was an adolescent and she would make some kind of mistake or just human error, I would cancel her like an upset Swiftie, essentially. And I'm saying this with love. Like, I have so much respect. I'm literally wearing a Taylor Swift sweatshirt
You're
right
like,
now. So like,
Mom, you're problematic, Mom.
yeah, Mom, you are problematic. Like, why couldn't I get a ticket to your Eras tour, Mom? So while I was writing that chapter, I came across this sentiment that some of your listeners are probably familiar with, the idea of the good enough mother that was coined by Donald Winnicott. That was saying that hypothetically, even if there were such thing as like a perfect bento box, like kiwi in the shape of flowers mother who did absolutely everything right, the result of that would be a child who was like overly sensitive, overly fragile, not set up for disappointments in life because all they had ever known was this perfect mom. And I was thinking, like, maybe our celebrity mothers, our like celebrity pop stars, also just need to be good enough. Like, we need
Mhm.
space for our mothers, our, the subjects of our worship, whether we're talking about our family or, the public eye. Like, we need to make more room for people's fallibility. And that goes against this deeply ingrained halo effect. But we humans have done a lot of things that go against our nature that would otherwise be really destructive. So I think like in this day and age, when these dynamics are getting more intense because of pop stars, but also because of momfluencer culture and stuff like that, we need to practice holding space for others' fallibility. Like, we need the moms that we see online, momfluencers, female pop stars, whatever it is, we just need them to be good enough. And that will like save us all out of suffering, I think.
Mhm. And we can all breathe a little bit easier. We are talking to Amanda Montell, and we'll be right back.
Amanda, let's talk about some takeaways because, as we like to say, we're soaking in it. We get it. So, my husband and I, just over the weekend, we were talking about the tragic bridge collapse in Baltimore. And I had already seen, because I am on the internet a little bit too much, like immediately, like, oh, there it is, this proportionality bias, because I had read your chapter in your book saying this is what we do. It's a huge event. It can't just be a weird accident. And there it was. And then the conspiracy theories, or just I'm just doing my homework. I'm just asking the questions. You just have to wonder started to come in. And
Yeah.
and so is the first step in doing a little bit less magical overthinking, sort of noticing that sooner? Do we need to resist it actively? What do you think?
100%. So much of it is just simply awareness. And I find, I'll speak for myself, that awareness immediately helps me forgive. It helps me forgive myself. It helps me forgive others, because when we don't have an explanation for something that is rooted in facts or empirical studies or critical thinking of any kind, we do tend to assume the worst. So, so many of the chapters in this book were written because I personally needed to work something out for myself, because I couldn't understand why I respond to, say, clickbait headlines with a fight or flight response that would be more appropriate for getting chased by a predator in the woods. I was like, what is going on with me? Like, am
Right.
I
Right.
unwell? Like, am I out of my mind? Or like,
Mm.
is the world really this scary? Like, are headlines really this threatening? Like, that was just something that I needed to work out for myself. And same with that sunk cost fallacy chapter. Same with the halo effect chapter. I mean, every single chapter of this book, I was just sort of very selfishly being like, I need to understand myself, because life on earth feels inexplicably painful. Like, I'm
Mhm.
okay. I have food in my fridge. Like, I have a warm bed to sleep in, like I'm a writer. I'm okay. Like, no one's trying to hurt me. And yet, like, I feel nervous and dread filled like all the time. And so I just wanted to square that. And I mean, I have implemented a lot of the little like fun facts and more like actionable pieces of advice that I came across while writing the book into my life. And that's been helpful. But what's been more helpful than all of that is just simply knowing that there is not something evil about the world. There is not something like inherently nefarious about literally everyone I encounter online. There is not something like truly bananas about me. There is just this clash between our cognitive biases and the world we've created. And so being able to identify even just the 11 cognitive biases in the book, which I think are the ones that are kind of more prominent and having the most negative impact on us right now, that alone has just let me like breathe a sigh of relief.
Can you talk a little bit about the time meaning matrix? I was just thinking about
Yes.
this as I was I have, you know, all of these same anxieties and panics. And I'm in New York City today and walking around, and I had seen there's like TikToks about people getting punched in the face. And I had seen like two
Yes.
of
I've seen
them.
them.
And I just spent an hour walking around New York City, like looking at every single person, like, this is the person who's going to punch me. This is the person who's going to, and I'm realizing like,
Yeah.
this is not an abstract thought, the things that you're talking about. Like, I saw two stories about people being punched, and I have wasted my entire day like dodging people who I think are about to punch me. Although no one punched me, and I bet no one ever thought about it, you know? And so
Yeah,
how do we
yeah.
actually, like,
Well,
break from that
for
panic
most of human
response
history,
and get
our
a little active
attention
about how our
was a
minds are
perfectly
working?
good enough barometer to tell what was dangerous. But now there are just like a
Right.
bajillion more things attempting to claim our attention. We're living in the literal attention economy. So we can't always trust ourselves to know what to panic about anymore. Which is just like good to know. So you mentioned the time meaning matrix, which was based on this business writer named Peter Drucker, who wrote many, many books throughout the 20th century on business management, time management, including 1966's The Effective Executive. And he coined this idea of the urgent versus important matrix. Specifically in the context of the workplace. So it can be really hard to know what to prioritize. Like, is this task urgent but not important? Meaning I need to address it right now, but I don't need to put all of my effort into it. Is this task maybe important but not urgent? So I don't need to address it right away. I can postpone it for later. So many tasks you'll find are actually neither urgent nor important, something that can be
Mhm.
delegated or something that doesn't even need to be addressed at all. So I find that coming up with a diagram or like a matrix like this can also just be helpful for your daily life. For me, I think about it in terms of urgency and importance, um, but more so in terms of like, will this be a good expenditure of my time? And will this make my life feel more meaningful? So, yeah, like a news story might be urgent. Like it might be if it's happening in your town or if it's happening on your block. But maybe not because as to your point, like that punching in the face story, that's clickbait. So like that is like a
Right.
sexy story for headlines, but it turns out that that might not be urgent or important. So it's important to kind of
Right.
like slow. What is important is to kind of slow down and be able to evaluate instead of just listening to your most instinctive impulses about headlines, because our instincts were not built for headlines. They were built for
Right.
real
Right.
threats, physical threats. So this is also trauma too, right? It's like, the word trauma is getting a lot of airplay right now, which is its own double-edged sword, because while it's amazing that people are talking about pain and mental health, we're also using trauma to describe things that maybe aren't trauma. So
Mm,
it's, all of these things are a double-edged sword. But like, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that like we are having these really, really painful responses that
Mhm.
developed for a survival purpose in reaction to things that actually don't affect our survival. And so being able
Right.
to break that down and think more slowly and think like, is this urgent? Is this important? Is this both? Is this neither? It's just a good tool to be able to move through our ever complicating world.
For sure. So when you're having the, like, chased by a bear panic reaction on the subway because you saw 2 TikToks, it's just I really thought of it today, like, this is an example of, like, let me slow it down my thinking and think the statistical likelihood feels like 1 in 1, but it's probably 1 in a million, but TikTok has got me thinking it's like 1 in 2 at least, like, it's either me or the woman next to me. Not the case.
Well, because the TikToker is incentivized to make you feel that way because
Yeah.
we are more likely to engage in threatening content, right? Like
Yeah.
if something is negative, because negativity feels more novel. Someone who shares something negative seems like they're in the know. That's according to MIT research. We are like naturally gravitating toward things that make us feel scared for a good reason because historically, things that made us feel scared were probably things we needed to pay attention to and react to. And so, consciously or unconsciously, people in media know this and they want you to engage with their content. And the easiest way to do that is to like make you feel scared.
Amanda, this book is absolutely as entertaining on every page as you are to talk to. It's
Oh,
fascinating. It's the perfect blend for me. Like there's research, there's studies. Margaret knows how much I love a good
Lights
study.
say
And
me up. Lights say me
super
up.
funny stories, Taylor Swift stories. Like every page is like, oh yeah, I recognize this. And then you just see the world through new eyes. So I love this book. Tell us about your new podcast.
oh, yeah. Okay. So the new podcast is launching in May. So about a month from now. And I was just not ready to stop talking about the subjects that I can't stop overthinking about, so to speak. And so the podcast is called Magical Overthinkers. And every week I'm going to choose a sort of buzzy, zeitgeisty, very confounding, potentially anxiety provoking topic from the culture, whether it's narcissism or monogamy or cannibalism. And I'm going to chat with a brilliant and charismatic scholar, philosophers, psychologists, astrophysicists, asking them the sorts of questions that only an overthinker would ask. So these sort of thought spirally type questions that maybe might make me look kind of nuts, but that I ultimately just really want to know. And fortunately, everyone I've been talking to for this podcast is more than willing to entertain those thought spirals. I'm also bringing to them thought spirals from my Magical Overthinkers Club, my listeners, my followers on social media. And so, yeah, every episode of the podcast is going to be overthinking about Blake, overthinking about Blake, overthinking about blank. And it's going to be a lot of fun, really informative. And it launches in mid-May.
Fantastic. And Amanda Montell's new book, which is called The Age of Magical Overthinking Notes on Modern Irrationality, is out now. And I assume, as they say, you can find it wherever books are sold.
That's correct.
We know it's 2024, people. We know how to buy a book. Go do it. Amanda, thanks so much for talking to us today. This was a great conversation.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Amanda.